So just to contextualize and take some few examples from history, I think it is informative to, when we talk about extractive violent political economy, it is like kind of important and instructive and very informative example to start from this huge project, Jungule Canal. And why it is important is that it shows the misused development, water and energy related. John Garang Dimapur, he did his PhD. Actually, I was reviewing it even yesterday to take some notes. Of course, I can't bring it here, but his PhD was about this Jungule Channel. It is in South Sudan here, this red dots here. When I say here, do you see the arrow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You see the arrow? Yeah. The idea of this canal was because in this area, the water is spread across wide area, and there is a lot of evaporation lost, and it was in like kind of north part of Sudan, and mainly Egyptian interest to dig this canal to increase the water volume in the Nile towards the downstream areas. What Jongarang was saying is we should not look at this, we should not look at local communities just from perspective of compensating them. Rather, he was actually proposing how this could transform and introduce mega agricultural projects that could meet the food security, not even development, agricultural development of the region, South Sudan region, and the whole nation. And the irony and the connection here is he defended his thesis 1981, and when he in 1983, when he led the second civil war in South Sudan, this French excavator, it was called Lucy. This was the first target of SPLM, because this makes a lot of sense in connecting, when development is mismanaged for the interest of others, not, then it provokes this connection. We could come back to it and but I just wanted to start with this one. But also we could take examples from how High Dam was also the negotiation between Egypt and Sudan, and who was displacing the Nubian communities here. Also, we could talk about the other regional dimension of Renaissance Dam. I think Sara will be telling us a little bit about. So it has regional dimension, but also that shapes how regional countries interact with each others. So, and the story we want to draw from this in our trying to make the connection is that sustaining exclusionary projects with through violence with varying degrees. So the civil war erupted by 1983 continued actually almost till 2000 or early 2000s. Yeah. So, and this is also has to do with what a phenomena that we can call securitization of developmental questions. When people marginalize, ask for more inclusive political conditions or more inclusive developmental policies, that kind of demands is met by highly securitized measures, and that escalates the resistance into civil war, the civil war into genocidal war, and the genocidal war into separation, and this existential problem of post-colonial Sudan. Yeah. So this is how securitization of development and securitization of water energy policies, as we saw from the Jungule Channel. And but I will go and focus on a particular period to give more kind of focused and zoom in to see these connections. So historical Nile water agreements also like provoke some tensions, regional tensions also between countries, as you know. Let me jump directly to the case I want to elaborate, what I call post-2005's boom in hydropower, building dams and dismantling Sudanese state, I call it. This image is very like kind of telling. To give you a background of actually, in the few pages I will read, you will know the background. But the image is this is the inauguration of Marawi Dam. That was one day before ICC issued warrant against Omar al-Bashir for accusing him of like committing genocidal and war crimes in Darfur. And the time is also very telling because the inauguration of such a huge project was a very political one. And also the construction of the dam itself was political, as we will see. So what I argue here is that dams generate not only electric energy, but also political power for a regime that is committing violence, that is connected to, for example, how China as partner of Sudan use veto against international intervention, all those kind of connections. But to give you a more deeper, like how that is Darfur connected to, how that is connected to Darfur crisis, ICC and dams, how the regime portrayed the making unity an attractive option. That is the story I want to tell you, but I will actually leave you with this one, who is paying the cost and who is reaping the benefit. But with that, with these titles, I just indulge your attention because reading is boring, but I think it is a condensed one. I would misrepresent it if I just tell you, but I will just read 3 pages quickly so you kind of grasp what kind of stories I'm telling. So the story starts with, yeah. So I don't know if I can share this one as well. Sorry. I stop sharing and okay, do you see? Yeah. Okay, because I will read, you will just listen. You don't need to, just relax and listen. Okay, so like the story, I want to start with what is in some literature called like the Second Islamist Republic. That was after removal of Trabi from power in late 1990s. And the story starts from there and how that Boston, so the story is from 1999 to 2010. Turabi's removal was diplomatically conveyed as a de-radicalization of ruling regimes. A new diplomacy succeeded in rapprochement occurred with African and Arab countries and even many Western countries. This gradually opened up access to financing for big infrastructure. What increased the financing opportunities were the discovery of oil and entry of China as Khartoum's largest trading partner. Oil was considered as grantor for Sudan's ability to pay debts. With this economic recovery, the regime was seeking to improve its image, like global image and regional image, by distancing itself from the one of terroristic supporting country. The effect went as far as offering intelligence and security collaboration with the United States of America by providing valuable information about the jihadist movements. But with these attempts of diplomatic rapprochement, the regime faced external pressure to stop the war in South Sudan and conclude a peace agreement. The peace agreement negotiation led to SPLM, Sudan's People Liberation Movement, led by John Garang, the story we just started. Participation in power. as a trampling joint for a regime that did not know the participation of power that it had monopolized on its own. There was a growing feeling among the Islamists prior to the signing of peace agreement that the southern rebels had taken more than they deserved from their share of power. Rather, the agreement stipulated that there would be a fair election towards the end of the transitional period under the supervision of international communities. This era was thus marked by two things: economic boom, but also fundamental political challenge to the ruling Islamists. In order to get out of this political crisis with the help of improving economy, the regime's mastermind economist and former finance minister, Abdurrahim Hamdi, developed a strategic plan in 2005. In a conference of Islamist leaders held for this purpose, Hamdi stated that the agreement signed with SPLM would implement what he called American plan of regime change, which will eventually replace any Islamist-oriented ones with pro-Western Christian minority, meaning SPLM in case of Sudan. Hamdi claimed that the Islamists would find themselves out of power in the election scheduled to take place towards the end of the transitional period if they do not follow a strategic plan to navigate this politically turbulent period. To this end, he argued that the triangle of Dungula, Sinnar, Kurdufan nexus is a home for potential 25 million voters who can be persuaded in favor of Islamists because of their cultural background and pro-Arabism and Islamism. That is how he read the their political constituency. However, their success requires, he argued, that the establishment of a large, striking, quick-yielding development projects in this geographical area if the party wants to succeed in 2010's election. He openly stated, and I quote, that the interest of the party must be prioritized so that our efforts are not wasted in empty constructions. So wasted in empty construction. By empty constructions, he means also peace agreement and achieving peace in Darfur and also. So he called it like empty efforts. So this statement needs a bit of contextualization. What Hamdi suggests here is the exact opposite of publicly pledged process of peace building, developing marginalized war-affected areas and reallocating resources of post-conflict reconstruction. So these processes, if followed, were to reduce development disparities and would lead to realization of the main peace agreement agenda of making unity an attractive option when Southern Sudanese exercise their right of determination to remain united or separate. Hamdi, on the contrary, dissuaded his fellow Islamists from wasting their efforts in such an empty project and focus on their own political survival and politically and economically investing in the central parts of Sudan, which is relatively developed. Thus, this recipe for concentration of states' wealth, power, and development, in particular, historically dominant area for the sake of regime survival, was a recipe for escalation of war in Darfur and separation of South Sudan, as it was also antithesis of peace building and unification processes. Hamdi pointed out that implementation of this strategy is required manner should be entrusted in this required manner should be entrusted to a small administrative body freed from the bureaucratic administration of the state, which is granted broad power and exempted from restrictive laws. He wanted to free this unit also from the state power itself, so it can implement such a kind of project in a quick manner. Hence, the pairs of dams implementation units was informed under the presidential decrees of number 217 in 2005. So with wide authority is not subject to or accountable to any state institutions, but directly connected to a presidential committee. For instance, dams implementation units account, financial account, is not subject to the Office of General National Auditor, despite billions of dollars being injected into it. Many observers rightly describe this unit as a state within a state. It resembles somehow RSF, and I hope you will do me a favor of what is a resemblance later. I can't go into it. Dam implementation unit embarked on implementation of 6 dams in this way. Dam implementation unit monopolized wide powers and huge financial resources. To give an idea to the magnitude of such projects, Harry Verhoeven estimates the Marawi Dam alone accounted for 40% of public spending from 2006 to 2008. That tells you how big this is. Just one project. This is the cost of one project out of several proposed dams to be implemented by Dam Implementation Unit. Establishing Dam Implementation Unit with these powers helped the Islamists to remove their rivals, SPLM, I mean, from the real seats of power. The power sharing agreement allocated to SPLM, according to the CPA agreement, was 30% position of within the federal level. However, in reality, these seats in ministry and other state institutions were largely devoid of power and resources in favor of dams implementation units, which exclusively almost monopolized by the Islamists. Thus, the actual participation of SPLM in power has been substantially avoided, and also then friction started, then SPLM and the Islamists over the wealth and power. Hence, peace-building processes have been seriously damaged. The SPLM became more of an opposition party rather than a partner in a government throughout the transitional period until the secession of South Sudan. On the other hand, we find that all companies which won, quote unquote, won millions of dollar bids to work as subcontractors on projects associated with dams are companies that belong to the Islamists and their organizations and security companies like loyal to them. For example, just to give you a few examples, one of the big companies called MAM. MAM belongs to other 14 companies privately owned by former Federal Minister of Agriculture. Another company, Hijlij, belongs to Federal Minister of Energy. RAM belongs to a bigger group of companies, another company called High Tech, owned by President's brother. Bashir and Nasr belong to the National Security Agency and National Defense Forces, respectively. When these highly Islamized forces, military and security forces, have a stake in national economy, it gives them much greater incentive to maintain the status quo. And that is what we are witnessing now. They resisted the revolution, post-revolution, because they are connected to this political patronage, and this is a natural outcome of political economy of war. So they play a part in privatizing the state itself at the expense of building a professional and national-oriented security sector. The current war is a direct outcome of this political economy of war, of course, considering other factors. And then the last company I want to give an example, Danfodio, is an organization with main objective of increasing funds to the Islamist movement, as it is mentioned on their website. So this is problematic because multi-billion dollar from Sudan's oil revenue and external debts from China and Arab countries, petrodollar, were directly injected into this hardly accountable unit of dams implementation unit. The global partners financing these projects did not care about the cost that reached sometimes 5 times more than the originally planned, like the cost overrun, because of the corruption involved, according to some observers. As these regimes like China and Arab countries do not care much about corruption issues and claim non-interference policy in the internal affairs of a sovereign state, of course, that doesn't mean other countries and international companies care more. In fact, some European companies, example, Tamer, German company, was involved in planning and supervising Marawi Dam. So it's not, and I go back to the image I show you, the picture of inauguration. That was like inauguration of Marawi Dam in 2009. Marawi Dam was inaugurated in a way that show the most expensive infrastructure project, like hydropower project, like water energy project in the history of Sudan, was based on political calculations of the regime more than the claimed national interest and development. The inauguration took place the day before the announcement of the arrest warrant for President Bashir by the International Community Court, accusing him of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Darfur. For this huge opening, senior Arab and African dignitaries and diplomats were invited. Tens of thousands of regime loyalists, as you can see in the picture I presented, of loyalists were mobilized from all states of Sudan. This opening was a political par excellence, as was the decision to build the dam itself. And what is evidenced in the slogan or chanting of the crowd, as-Sadd, Rad. This Arabic phrase means the Khartoum regime is responding to the unjust claims of colonialist international criminal court by providing real development on the ground. The regime invested in this dam in a tremendous political investment and promoted that the completion of dam project meant the end of poverty in Sudan, and that Sudan would reach energy satisfaction and even export it. The dam generated for the regime not only electric power, but also, and more importantly, the much needed political power and legitimacy for a regime committing a genocidal war in parts of its region. The dam implementation unit became the main financier of the election campaign for the Islamist party, which won, quote unquote, the election, which was boycotted by the large opposition parties, including the SPLM, which was by then preparing itself for the separation processes and ceased to work for the unity. Hamdi's strategy, which entrusted to DAM's implementation unit, achieved its desired political fruits in favor of Islamists, providing lucrative business for their companies, weakening their rivals in power. The Islamists politically gained from the propaganda campaign, dragging the nation, for example, out of poverty and appearing as a driving developmental force. Most importantly, they managed to navigate through the politically challenging period of 2005-2010 and continued in power. But the question is, what happened to Sudan as a result of implementing this strategy at this critical period of its nation's history? The declared goal of the transitional period was the two partners of the national unity, I mean the Islamists and the SPLM, would work together to make the unity as an attractive option for Southerners, so they would not vote for secession by the end of the transitional period. That was to be achieved by reallocating resources and developing South Sudan and reversing the legacy of wars and marginalization and destruction that started with the story we were even before that. So the practically adopted strategy worked towards the exact opposite direction and led to the secession of South Sudan. The strategy instead increased the existing development disparities based on the fact that the geographical area named by mainly by Darfur rebel movement and other marginalized areas by Hamdi's state is the same area that historically had the lion's share of wealth and power in Sudan. For instance, these arguments on development disparities were emphasized in a book titled Black Book to anonymous author, and greatly influenced Darfur rebel movements. Therefore, the strategy did not take into account the approach of development justice and issues of state building on a basis that takes into account issues of inclusivity, citizenship, and addressing the historical injustice that is integral to solving existential crisis of Sudanese state. It rather intensified factors and discriminations and intensity of wars in Darfur and led to separation of South Sudan. Although that period represents the peak of oil exportation, the economic boom, the regime was not satisfied with that, but rather raised Sudan's external debts by more than 100%. How this debt again after the revolution curtailed the democratic transition, do me a favor and ask. I think I'm running out of time to describe this, but it will come later in our discussion, hopefully. So I'm concluding soon. Sorry, I think I took. I have already argued the practical benefits of dams are indisputable, but my focus has been on political insensitivity, especially in regards to the question of whose benefits they are. This is the question crucially connected to political unrest, not only among people who are directly affected by dams, like in Marawi, in Northern Sudan, in Blue Nile, in Atbara, in all those like where dams are constructed, they are people who are directly impacted and facing the like kind of resistance to this, because it leads to their impoverishment and resettlement in an unfair conditions. We could elaborate on that. Not only those who are directly facing this, but also this question of indirectly being affected. Even those who, like, actually it is being conceptualized that, you know, this is the development of the central riverian part of Sudan, but that is connected to other kind of political economic processes. The argument in these war-torn areas is that the historical trends of Sudan's political economy, which can be traced back to era of slave trade, still carry the same features of reallocating nations' resources in particular areas. They call it Hamdi's triangle. So this trend has started a gradual disintegration of the nation by intensifying historically experienced injustice rather than healing them, while publicly pledging to make unity an attractive option for Southerners. The NCP investment reflected more disparities than they bridged. Paraphrasing what Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, described dams as temples of modernity. So paraphrasing this metaphor, I argue that pharaohs of modernity have enthusiastically engaged in building the temples of modernity and dismantling the institutions of modernity on which they sit. To conclude, critically examining and unpacking the concept of water-energy war nexus and showing how it has been and can be misused, as shown from the case of Islamist dams in Sudan, does not suggest absolute deterministic rejection of this like kind of development and energy generation and all those things. But nor do I call for abandoning the fact that there could be a genuine, inclusive, peace-oriented, well-considered water energy nexus. In fact, these kinds of critical examination of such hegemonic concept will illuminate the state and its, the state and its resources and its developmental projects from being hijacked in favor of a myopic national actors and external exploitative relations. This perspective is particularly important during the current neoliberal global order and scramble for resources in Africa under the pretext of encouraging investment and other associated developmental package. The immediate threat facing the Nile River are not mainly the environmental threats and external scramble, but rather the actions of Nile Basin states ruling elites regime that have not yet reached the post-colonial state. It's not post-colonial yet. So the post is still empty. We are not living a post, yeah? So have not reached the post-colonial state and still deal with their resources and subjects, not citizens, subjects by long-standing colonialist mentality. This phenomena is repeated in most African countries with varying degrees, although its repercussions have not reached the disastrous levels witnessed in Sudan. The role of researchers and research institutes in the Nile Basin country must be devoted to critical examination of processes through which state resources and development are being exploited under disguise of flowery discourses of development, modernization, energy, investment, etc. Thus, the Islamists presented themselves through a developmental discourse of a high modernist discourse that shows their efforts to build the country, while in reality they were leading the very processes of its destruction. Analyzing the wide gap between the discourse and reality and answering the question of why do they seek to build dams as if they are devoted to the state destruction. And here I'm paraphrasing the famous Sudanese novel. Why are they, do they love the country? Why do they love as if they are devoted for hating it? So like this ironic of like destroying, building dams and destroying the state has been addressed. Like this is what I try to address in this presentation as a way of addressing deeper historically rooted political economy processes on which the current war is partially predicated. So we will come in the discussion, how is it predicated? Thanks a lot. Sorry, I took, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamer, for the very interesting presentation. And I think it's opened a lot of questions and discussions, but we will delay it a little bit until the presentation of Sara, and then we can have a shared discussion and commentary, and we will see, we'll take it from there. But thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot.
Maybe if there is one question.
Okay.
Yeah.
we can fill the waiting time by having just one question or comment or sharing ideas if anyone wants.
Just a really technical question, because dam unit, it was just for Meroe, but also for the other dam.
Okay.
Sorry, your voice is not very clear.
I will try with my
Yes,
headphones.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just technical question. I was wondering if the dam unit, it was just for Meroe Dam, or it was created also for the other dams you showed on the map? And it's still active or not? How long, you know, it was?
Yeah, so it was actually it was unit before before the presidential decree. It was unit for like just implementing the Meroe Dam, but it was after that it was kind of promoted to kind of big unit like empowered politically and economy to build not only dams, those 6 dams I show, but also airports, road, and everything. Almost it was a state within a state, like most of the, with wide authorities and huge financial resources. It was to build those dams like Kajbar, Dal, Shrek, Upper Nile, Upper Adbara, and also heightening of Cruceris Dam, and also South Sudan. There were dams to be implemented in South Sudan as well. So it was like, for all those. And then, like after the revolution, because that is another question of like, because this, like the whole idea of, or at least how to dismantle the Islamist empire and also because they operated under and subcontracted under the dams implementation. It continued, but in a much more like kind of demuted manner. So it was brought under the water and water irrigation ministry. Actually, it was much more powerful than 2-3 ministries.
Thank you. And I have still a question. Do you know, it was civil servants who were acting in this unit?
Yes.
Because I know that in the Ministry of Minerals, first they tried to do a bit like the same as the dam unit, but for, for gold, but they didn't succeed. There were a lot of fighting inside the ministry. So they create the Sudanese company for.
Exactly,
so that's
the same story. I mean, this is the whole story of the revolution and post-revolution attempt to dismantle the regime itself. Like they were resisting. They are very well connected in terms of military, in terms of security, in terms of politics, in terms of economic. So like they were not that successful. I mean, this is a part of also. I mean, that's why I was saying, like even like the post-revolution kind of political agreement between the FFC and the security, because the security is connected to the old regime. They were resisting all this, yeah? They were packed by till like the coup and everything. So this kind of resistance, yeah, they were not successful in post-revolution to dismantle all or to, yeah. So it's the same story everywhere in all those institutions. Somehow, even if they were taken from like the bigger positions, they were still connected, maintaining, and yeah. Because like part of the subcontracted companies, like the political, like security political patronage networks continued, yeah? They were part of the agreement. That is part of the failure, yeah? Also to transit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tamer. I think we are ready for Sarah's presentation now, and we can continue the discussion after.
Yeah. You guys can see everything? Yeah.
Yes.
Great, and thank you, Tamer, for your presentation and all the important work that you have been doing in the past years. When I met you in Egypt a couple of months ago, and I was still trying to enter Sudan and try to, work in Sudan, the discussion we had around development, power relation, and also violence, and how violence is affecting communities in this region was very, very inspired for my work and for the documentary I'm doing. But in general, I think in all my work and what I try to explore, it's really this relationship between power and access that for me as a journalist, means a lot. And this is really like the line of my inquiry also. And particularly you talk about this nexus, right? For me, what is interesting here is exploring the nexus between regimes of visibility and regimes of power. Because in general, the work I do, right, as a documentary filmmaker, as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, I always try to investigate and try to understand how and why violence occurred. And I think on the Nile specifically, this regime of visibility is very contested. And yeah, dams are one example, right? It's by the fact that dams are also used, to establish nation, as you said. But I think what is interesting here is also to explore how these, normative, hierarchical regimes and form of visibility on the other hand are intertwined with the social, cultural, with historical concept. And this is, I think, is clear when we want to understand where violence occurs and what shape it takes and against who, right? I think is especially in the work I do, what I try to do is really to try to reconstruct this logic in a sense that I try to give meaning and I try to look at how this communicative function of violence, in this case, affect the invisibility or the visibility of the violence itself, right? So I really try to explore these regimes of visibility as regime of power. And yeah, I think it's key if we want to explore the structure of power, right? And how it's created to one side visible community, invisible community, marginal community, and so on, right? And this distance also between the center and the periphery. And yeah, I mean, for the past months, I've been working on this documentary that will be broadcasted soon on Arte, trying to understand how this community have experienced violence and marginalization and the link between water control and also conflict. So while
Yeah. Là, nous, c'est parfait. On est sur le Zoom. On a tes commentaires. Donc, il faut que tu partages en diapo.
OK, donc...
C'est bon.
Ouais. Et après? Ça, et après? Ça?
Attends. J'attends que ça apparaisse. Bouge pas. Ouais. Ah non.
Ça? Non?
Non.
What do you see?
En fait, ça.
You see that too? Okay. So maybe I can just reduce the commentary or close it. Like this, maybe?
Yeah.
It's good like this?
Yeah. Better.
Huh?
Yeah.
Or here, or yeah, I don't know.
And put it in on full. Yeah.
Diaporama, like this?
Diaporama.
Still like this.
I think it's perfect here, and I don't know.
Yeah. But if I move, you go? No, it doesn't go, you see?
No, yeah.
There is
it's
a
okay.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for those guys following from Zoom. And there is some problem with the...
À mon avis, c'est dans le mode, il faut se mettre sur diaporama.
Yeah.
Là, sur la bandelette.
Non, mais ça met diaporama pour la salle, mais pas pour vous, en fait.
C'est ça, ouais.
Si je puis me permettre un petit...
Ouais.
Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez. En fait, il faut aller dans le partage de Zoom. Quand tu fais sur partager l'écran, normalement, tu as une fenêtre avec plusieurs choses et il faut que tu choisisses le diaporama et pas le PowerPoint.
Super. Merci, Jean-Fabien.
On progresse à chaque séminaire.
Non, il n'y a pas de...
Non, il n'y a pas ce que tu dis.
Bon, après, les notes étaient bien écrites, donc il y avait...
Bon, parce que normalement, quand tu fais partager l'écran, il te propose plusieurs options et tu as plusieurs fenêtres normalement qui apparaissent. La fenêtre PowerPoint et la fenêtre diaporama, qui sont deux fenêtres différentes normalement. Bon, c'est pas grave. De toute façon, on voyait bien, il n'y a pas de souci.
Oui, c'était pas très gênant en fait.
Ça ne nous gênait pas beaucoup.
Je te envoie.
C'est celle que tu m'as envoyée?
Ouais, je t'envoie le lien. Donc, tu peux faire le partage de toi. Non? We maybe find, in two people, we'll find how to find the machine. But I can try again.
Le transfert ou sur le...
Non, le lien, je t'envoie.
Le premier.
Ouais. So if I say...
Non, parce que c'est le Google Doc et ça ne m'autorise pas.
Non, je te autorise. Yeah, I don't know why it does this. But maybe if you share the screen, yeah, on va faire ça. Ça marche? Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same for them. So share it, it's better. So sorry. We were trying to be perfect, but...
What can you see if I share now?
Yeah, share. We see.
But what they can see?
We show you.
Yeah, now it's working, no?
No, now it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If not, you know what I can do? I can export the PDF.
No, it's perfect.
No,
it's
it's
perfect.
it's working now.
Yeah.
You guys can see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, while I'm talking about this regime of power and how they have influenced the Nile politics and all, you know, what we have seen as kind of revolution, no, in terms of the use of water and the planning. We also need to remember how this has been used to keep these guys in power, right? So here we started with Churchill, but also we have Benito Mussolini, Nasser, and Haile Selassie. Like all, they have played a role in this regime game, I think. And when we look about the role that each one of them has been playing, I think is interesting to start from the British imperial system and the way forward, right? Here I have a clip of an archive of the time. Let's try to play it and see if the...
Un important problème dont dépend l'avenir britannique va recevoir un début de solution. Il s'agit de la répartition des eaux du Nil. Il ne s'agit encore que d'un accord entre deux pays, la République arabe et le Soudan, alors que ces pays, en tous, sont plus ou moins intéressés au débit du Nil.
So the interesting part, I think, here with the Nile Agreement and how they have been harnessing this historical right over the Nile and the British colonial also era, right? I think this is really like coming as a steady development of how formal treaties as well as informal working agreement we see have taken place and have constituted this kind of power regime when we look at the Nile. So here I just put some of them that I think are interesting to consider and to look, because from the very beginning, so from the initial agreement, but also when we talk about the 59 agreement, what is interesting here is the control on water and on resources is always taking this British colonial legitimacy in that sense. For example, in the 1902, so this is a border agreement that was signed between Ethiopia Emperor Menelik and the UK. They established the border between the region where today the Renaissance Dam is located. So as we, if we go back in time, we see that how that border agreement is influencing today dynamics. This, we can go to the 1959 agreement and again see how the agreement has been used to build to use the water in Aswan High Dam, and how the agreement also has been in the 59 agreement, for example, when Sudan was independent, how that agreement also was playing a role in the water sharing and the revisionist of the previous agreement between the Cairo and Sudan. So I think in different ways, I don't want to enter into the historical here too much, but what I'm interested here is trying to exploring these regimes of control and how this dam implementation project that you mentioned, Tamer, are also going through agreements and legal agreements that are signed and shared between countries. So how also this agreement and this framework has been used as a tool of control and governance in a sense. Because when we see, for example, the displacement of the Nubian from the Aswan, when the Aswan Dam was, started to build, and when there was the implementation of the agreement for the water sharing, again, that agreement was mentioning, for example, compensation for community and so on, right? So in a way, this, if we want to analyze violence and how our violence is taking place, I think we really need to explore the wider, deeper, and pre-existing socio-political context, but also look how the state has been manifesting, right? So for me, looking at this kind of legal part is it's important. There is something that you wrote, Tamer, that I was really interested in, especially when when we look about violence and the way that violence manifests. You talk about, you know, deeper layer of societal and political authoritarianism that have created a sort of slow violence, right? So here the violence is not spectacular, but is a slow violence. And when I was doing my research for the film, I came across another archive that is another interesting archive that I think enters in this idea of how state-society relationship are constituted and how this development discourse is into this dynamics. And I think this man that you will see here in this archive is one of the first that use this discourse.
المعارف السياسية والاجتماعية والقومية والعسكرية في الشعب المصري. وتنتهي بأنها تطل الأحزاب الضخمة التي تصب مصرا بالسليم وتحتدم مياهه في أكبر بحيرة صنعها الإنسان لتكون مصدرا دائما للرحمة.
I don't know if you agree with me, but maybe we can discuss later about this. But there is a parallelism between what Nasser was saying and what you said about Bashir a few years later, right? So this idea that dams are bringing economic benefit, they are, you know, this kind of high modernistic ideology. You know, and then again here, I think the violence, if we want to explore this nexus, then the violence is legitimized against others because these nationalistic projects are glorified, are, you know, part of the future, the bright future that this project will bring. So yeah, again, I think we saw how dams on the Nile are instrumental for this state building process. And I think Ethiopia is not, you know, far away from this enthusiastic, participative, massive building, you know, dynamic. You know, nevertheless, to say, I think the modernization discourse is pretty much alive in Ethiopia today. And they are not just, you know, pursuing this through the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, but also by other dams that they are developing as, you know, as a modern state and etc. This is the Grand Renaissance Dam. I visited last year. In this period, I was there. I think this is one of the most contested dam that was built on the Nile so far, and probably is one of the biggest dam project in the African continent. What is interesting about this dam is also, as I said before, the location. The location it's very key here. We are 20 kilometers from the border with Sudan in this region that is called Benishangul Gumuz region. So if we want to look at the way that the dam plays a role, we also, I think, can draw, and I will speak about this a little bit later, about the relationship between water, land access, large-scale land project, and the community. But before reach that, I want to mention how access is also playing a role here. This is a picture I took just, you know, on the way to the dam, just for you to understand how access play a role here, in terms of how can you access these places. As a journalist, as a researcher, it took me more than 8 months to grant an authorization to visit the dam. I had to collect something like 7 to 8 letters from different local authorities, from the regional government to the national security, to the dam office, to the media office. So all this process as kind of layer, I think is really important, because it gives us this idea of how access and control is central here when we want to explore visibility of violence, and when we want to explore power relationship. and domination. The road that take you to the dam is a highly securitized road. There are something between 15 and 20 checkpoints of the Ethiopian army that are guarding the dam. So without official letter and official authorization, you can't access this area. So that's why I think it's very important to mention also how the securitization and militarization of these sites play a role in the way that we can explore power dynamics. What I'm interested here is particularly the invisibility of violence, right? So if we are questioning these regimes of visibilities as regimes of power, I think we need to explore and think about violence, aesthetic power, access, and the relation between these. So the violence in this border area doesn't operate only physically. We don't see the violence. It's more like, it's more symbolic, it's more systematic in that sense. And this, I think, I particularly look at the violence on marginalized community. But for me, this has also continued to shape the relationship between the state, the access to land, and in an area where this marginalized community are becoming visible only as a political intervention that reinforce the idea that this community can be governed, can be controlled, can be given access to land. So in the sense, there is a visibility that goes hands in hands with the idea that we can use this territory, that we can extract resources from this territory. And yeah, I think central to my work and you know, the discussion here is the experience of Gumus community that are community that have been marginalized by the state and are very that are often lacking any visual documentation, visual evidence, because again, it's an area where access is limited, right? In this Benishangul Gumus region, the state is divided in different provinces. The largest Gumus presence is in the region of Medek, that is on the north side of the Nile, where the Grand Renaissance Dam is also located. And other two areas are called Asusa and Kamashi zone. All this area, it's an area where elections haven't been taken place in the past years. There is violent conflict that is not just as a result of the competition for resources, but also it's, you know, encompasses several factors that are inherited from the past. And you know, what is also important to mention here is the presence of the gold and how gold has been also important. And I hope maybe Mohammed will talk more about this, but this area has a very important geopolitical significance, not only because of the water resources and the dam, but also because of the gold deposits that are present in there, right? What we have to mention also is that Gumus community have been, you know, heavily dependent on this kind of artisanal gold mining, and they depend on mostly on what nature can offer to them, because again they have been marginalized. So from form of education opportunity, and yeah, definitely there is a low orientation to technology. And we saw how in this area in recent years, migration of gold miners, you know, from different areas of Ethiopia, but also across Sudan. So it's really a porous border. How this migration has been intensifying. It's really kind of a belt, you know, that goes between Sudan across the border to Ethiopia. And there is a mix of artisanal miners like this one that you see in this picture, but also like larger scale mining places. So again, the majority of the local population in this area is engaged in gold mining as a primary source of livelihood. And I think here is interesting to look at how this, you know, power constellation between access to resources, gold, land, it's intertwined in the sense that the community are always described as backwards, uncivilized, and there is often this idea that there are these large empty spaces that are awaiting the hand of the civilized, the modern to come, the society to be more sedentary society. This discourse are kind of embedded in this, political identity of how also the Ethiopian state is trying to continue building this development discourse, in the sense that the authority are all often using this development discourse to dominate others, in the sense that large investment need to be coming to this area because we need to civilize this community. I see how these also political projects are instrumental of a kind of resource capture strategy, right? In a sense that the area it's very rich. But again, if we go back to the idea of violence and how this is playing a role in this power struggle, I wanted to mention that this area has also been at the crossroad of multiple power struggle for not only for resources, but also for political control. There has been not only mass displacement that is definitely linked to deadly episode, but also little visual evidence of what is going on there. So this means that we are not really able to document this violence, to know what is happening. These, for example, are a few pictures that I was able to collect about a massacre that happened in December 2020, when 207 people were massacred in a small village in one of these Wereda in Benishangul Gumuz region. There are very few pictures that circulated online, and these are only the few evidence that we have of the massacre. So I think here is interesting because this image, in a way, emblematize and interpel the violence that has taken place in this area, again, that is heavily controlled, where internet blackout and communication blackout are happening daily, right? But what is interesting is that shortly after the massacre, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces officially started a law enforcement operation in the area, especially targeting this local community. And, some leaders started to say that this local community have to vanish. And then, some ethnic cleansing started and has continued for the past 2 years. So again, I think there is a lot of discourse going on in, especially when I visited the location. I remember how it was difficult to find, just as a driver, right, to bring you to that area. Because at one point, one of the latest city on the way to reach this location, I remember one of the people we met was saying, no, don't go too deep, don't go too far, because those people are black, those gumus are violent, those gumus are dangerous, right? So don't try to go there or to do anything in this area because they will kill you. So in fact, I think there is an interesting dynamic here when we look at the gumus experience. And again, the gumus are in Ethiopia, but the gumus are across the border, right? We have also gumus community in Sudan, in Damazin, and on the other side. But what is interesting here is that the violence is not really visible, right? As I show you, the only two pictures that we have of the violence taking place in the area are those two pictures that circulate online after the massacre. So in a way, I can see how the extractivism politics of this land negate try to make this community disappear from the agency or their as they are not human, right, in their land. And it's interesting also when we observe how the Ethiopian government has been trying to address the Gumus or other minority question, by granting them certain rights, by, for example, conducting a peace talk with them. And I wanted to share this clip because I think it's quite interesting.
Stop the...
Yeah, this one. Here.
Yes.
And
if we share again.
Go this, share again.
No, not professional, yeah?
Yes.
Not professional.
Yeah. So you can see?
Yeah.
Okay. This one.
Attends.
Okay, there are subtitles.
No.
No subtitles.
And just focus on the line. Subtitle.
Yeah, so why I wanted to share this clip from the film, because I think we see a lot of this call, right, for recognition, for visibility, for to be visible in this history of oppression, marginalization, displacement. And I think the experience here is very similar, Tamer, to other experience of other communities in Sudan, right? The community that was displaced because of the Merowe Dam, the community of Nubian that was displaced when they built the Aswan Dam, and the community that fought not to be displaced for Kashgar and etc., right? So to conclude, I really wanted to mention here, and I think the interesting discourse should be around how this factor, played a role into, control visibility around the dam, and it's a political control visibility around the dam. That, in the sense here, it had contributed to the invisibility of violence in the community that we see that were displaced. And what we can see here is how, in some cases, violence is deliberately and purposely made visible, and in others, violence is deliberately invisible, right? Or the opposite. In certain cases, we can see that violence is deliberately and purposely made invisible, and so on, right? So the dam, it's not an invisible place at all, right? Rather, I think this specific contextual invisibility affects the level of control over the environment and the potential political motives for showing or hiding this act of violence. So I want to end with this picture of this big artificial lake that has been created. And so as you can see, again, the big artificial lake is expanding, and the valley has been flooded and the community have been displaced. government official that I met, they are suggesting that this whole area will become a new tourist attraction area, right? Where fishermen will start to fish, with tourists will come and enjoy the breeze of the Nile and discover this community, right? So we can end, I think, by saying that this development project, as these hydroelectrical dams, but also, irrigation project, or, tourist attraction also project, or tourist development project happening in this border zone, right, in this periphery, are today at the center of state interest, in an increased violence strategy of legitimation of resource appropriation within, a broader, I think, development discourse. So I think, again, violence here led to dispossession and exclusion of local community. And this is not just an isolated case, but I think it's a part of a long history of exploitation of this frontier. Thank you, and sorry for the technical.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now we can open the time for discussions, for question, commentary, or Tamer, if you have something to comment or to say, or if you want it, or anyone actually. So
I see the Rafael.
Rafael, okay.
No, I was just using
yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sara, really. I just want to comment on the focus of how, like, the visibilization and invisibilization and its relation to, I mean, the very idea of constructing huge projects are based on you invisibilize people with that notion of, like, very colonialist notion of empty space, They are empty because you nullified them, They don't count. So the ground for you is like a blank paper that you can draw your very modernist kind of map of transforming. So the violence starts, even violence of invisibilization, it starts epistemically by reducing their interests, their very existence, let alone interest. You are not even acknowledging them to be there. So, and that is rooted actually in a very kind of even deep pedagogical and kind of the very fabric of our knowledge itself. Like till now we say Nile was discovered by kind of a colonial, because how was it discovered? Like the local people told him to go there and to cross the river there. There is some. So you assign yourself as a discoverer when you nullify those people. So how different kind of knowledge, different dimensionalities of water, energy, when these are cut out, then and when you highlight particular kind of visibility. So the violence starts from there. Then when people react to the fact that their interest, their very being is not being acknowledged, then they are suppressed. When they meet the suppression with more escalation, then so this is like you see it in not only in water, in like petroleum exploration, in all other projects, So how that is why it is embedded in a very very constitutive element of post-colonial states that carries not post, I still question the postness, It's not a post, So if it is post, they would be visibilized, they would be treated as citizens, not as subjects, not even below subjects, Thanks a lot. I really like the idea of visibility, invisibility, and connecting it to the violence and war.
Yeah, and especially I think when we have communities that they lack any form of visibility in today, digital environment, but also, in media representation, in research, in many form of, representing the claims of this community, automatically we see that there is a strategy to do so, I think, and that's where the power dynamic play a role. And here, I think, is also interconnected with the issue of access because again, access to these spaces is controlled and governed by a logic that want to exclude certain individual from accessing these areas. I'm sure that for the Chinese company to access these areas is not as difficult as for a journalist. But yeah, it's also, I think, important to critically question access and how access play a role in, the kind of knowledge production or the work that we do, right? More in general. And today it's impossible to go to Sudan and do research in Sudan. That also play a role in the invisibility of the conflict and how the conflict then is being shaped by other narratives, right? So yeah, it's still a work in process, Tamer, so. Maybe Mohammed, you want?
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. Thank you, Tamer. Thank you, Sara. I want to just ask about the about the two issues. One of them, can you tell us more about the political participation during this process? How how the federal government or the local or state government use political participation as the tools politically in the developmental project. And the other issue about the historical relation, it's not the historical relation between the Eastern Nile side, Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia. There is some kind of competition between Ethiopia and Egypt during the era of 50s and 60s. At that time, as we see, Abdel Nasser is with Soviet Union, and the Renaissance Dam starting with the American researcher at that time. And lately in 2010, 2011, there is some kind of relationship between the other kind of company and Ethiopian government working in this area. And also there is some link between the political consequences of the water projects or water, in 50s, when the negotiation between the Sudan and Egypt is, faced some kind of blockage, Aboud make a coup in Sudan and sign the agreement after a few months of the coup. And there's some kind of relation between this weird relation between Sudan and Egypt and Ethiopia and the democratic process in Sudan or in Egypt or in Ethiopia, and the competition between both of them, and the link of this competition with the international relation in different period. And because also that makes sense, if we focus on that, we can see more details about the competition between Ethiopia and Egypt during this war in Sudan, and where can we put the water issue and the dam issue and they link it with the conflict in Sudan. Yeah, these are the two questions. Very sorry.
And you know the answer, but you asked me the question. But yeah, so I think what is important, the first, the clip that we watch, where we have this rebel leader going to the community and offering them hospital, roads, and development project. I think it's that clip is it's key here, to try to understand the relationship between the central government, the local community, and the gumus. The person that you see in the middle of the group, that was the head of the GUMUS was one of the GUMUS leaders. So one of the leaders that when what we can say rebellion of this community started, so when the dam started to be built around 2011. Then communities and the discussion with communities on how they will be compensated. So again, there is this idea of compensation, how the community will receive compensation, for how many years, what they will get, and so on, started a little bit later with the development of the roads, so to access the dam. And so these communities started to see, big trucks passing in front of their villages, and started to see that actually, something was happening in their communities, right? Then there was a period when this community were in a kind of negotiation with the government to get a source of representation, political representation, but that ended very quickly by the fact that violence started to spread in this area, and then a military operation started. When the military operation started, so when the federal government started the military operation, so bringing Ethiopian army into these regions and the heavily presence of military in the region, in the this border area, we see that also the security structure has changed within the Ethiopian federal government. So the security was managed by a command post person. So there was not like any form of security that was managed directly from Addis Ababa, but was a local guy on the ground that was responsible of the negotiation and the control with the. So there is a kind of, I think, dynamic where you see that the federal government lack presence in this area. There is no like a strong political force in this area. There are political actors that interestingly have been also integrated into this dam discourse, how this rebel leader, Gran Gudeta, that is the rebel leader of the GUMUS Democratic Union, the group that was, behind this movement in Benishangul, has been integrated as a key guy in the regional government today to deal with the issue of the dam. So this guy today is going around from one community to another to advocate for community to give money to finish the dam, right? And so there is a kind of co-opting mechanism going on where local authorities that were intended to be against the central government are being co-opted by the government to become part of this national discourse of modernity and providing school and support to local community, right? So I think this is an important development. And obviously there is the Sudan development, right? Just across the border, because again, this area is very mixed and porous. There is no border, right? There is no demarcation. That's a colonial idea. Those communities are cross-border community. They are crossing, constantly the markets. These markets that are next to these gold sites are markets where you can meet, where you can find a lot of Sudanese product and etc. So there is really like a cross-border commercial links and dynamics. And also, I think the Sudanese dynamic within Damascene need to be also taken in consideration. You know better than I do what has been going on the other side, right? With the Funch, with the other community that are also, divided in this sense and within the Sudanese dynamic, right? So I will not enter into that because you are the expert here. But what I wanted to say is that there is really like a struggle for the competition of the resources. And the political dynamic, local or regional or federal, is also playing a role in the sense that they are using national building process and federal government policies to diversify who has access or not to the resources. So for example, certain ethnic group will be more able to have access to resources than other. in that sense, right? So you will have like people coming from Addis that are originally from Amara ethnic group that will have more access to these areas than Humus themselves, right? And this is also the discourse, I think, of the local, saying we see people coming from outside and benefiting from our land. They want to eradicate us from this land, right? So I think that was interesting to observe when I was there. And about the bigger macro dynamic, what you mentioned is true, right? I think what we should also look at is the role of international institutions here, and particularly the World Bank or other international institutions that were behind this mega project and have played a role in the way that the international relations also have been involving into this dam building or development projects and so on. And with Ethiopia, what was very interesting to observe is how this discourse of exclusion, like at one point, the Ethiopian government started to use this idea that they couldn't get any funding from the World Bank because of this dispute with Egypt. And they used that in a very clever way to convince the local that that was an anti-colonial project. So that dam project became a very strong incipit for them to develop an anti-imperialist, discourse. Like, for example, some of the Ethiopian leaders said that building of the dam for them was like Adwa, when the Ethiopians were fighting with the Italians and they kick out the Italian from Ethiopia. Building the dam for them was the same. They will do this alone. They don't need any foreigner to help them because the Egyptian, they didn't allow them to, negotiate with the World Bank, right? But this is obviously constructed and created, by a nationalist ideology of trying to use this dam also to fix some internal issues, right? So, for example, the dynamic of ethnicity within the Ethiopian society, right? And how this dam was a project to unify the society and to build the modern Ethiopian state with everyone was contributing to build the dam. And obviously this project has to be, I think, analyzed also within a macro dynamic, right? Where today we see that part of the way forward is by having other actors entering in the game. And I think here we shouldn't forget the role of the Emirati, right? The role of the UAE as a key player today in the region, and especially within Ethiopia. In the last years, they have signed 18 cooperation agreements in many fields, from defense to water to, and they are another big player that we see is it also in, behind the conflict in Sudan, and we see also present in Egypt, right? So I think, again, right, the water help us to explore other areas of influence and interest and economic development that behind them they hide other, the military, strategic, geopolitical elements that are also interested to develop, and especially with the Grand Renaissance Dam, I think the big role has been played by the Chinese because of the heavy support that the Chinese government within the Ethiopian administration, not only in the dam itself, but also within developing the lines, the constructing the power line, the grid that will bring this energy to other countries, because ultimately the goal is, and we'll say that the dream is always the same, Tamer. They want karba, they want electricity, and they want to sell electricity to other countries, right? But obviously, still, what I think is it's clear is that 60% of the Ethiopian population doesn't have access to electricity. So despite this big project, this expensive big project, yeah, and those community again that were living next to the dam, that were enjoying the water of the Nile, now they are displaced to other areas where they don't have even water. So this is also another important question when we talk about development, right? And how this all play a role here.
Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Peut-être Tamer,
Tamer, if you have something to add.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, the question of first the political participation, because the very nature of constructing a dam is built on let us go to the very basic premises of using water as a hydropower. It is argued that it is the cheapest source of energy. But that cheapness, it's not cheap, but it is cheapened. It is intellectually constructed as cheap because you are letting local communities, environment, and others to pay the cost. In that sense, it is cheap. So, but you can't sell such a project in a participatory manner, because when you take the participation seriously, people will bring their interest. And when they bring their interest, it complicates the implementation of project to you. So that is why you need to manipulate the participation. You don't really, that is part of also politics of invisibilization. Yeah, you wouldn't accommodate all their interests. That is why most of these mega projects are constructed actually under authoritarian regimes, under dictatorship, yeah? So because you need to rule out some of the costs, some of the voices, invisibilize some forces to implement, because if you don't do that, you can't end up implementing, yeah? So that is why usually political participation is compromised, and it is manipulated in a very, a lot of ways to dodge the serious participation of the affected communities and other communities. I think that is what I would say in a nutshell about participation. But the very interesting point about also the historical relations between upstream and downstream, the competition, and even shaping their relations, international relations, actually even anchoring in the world, Cold War politics, when Egypt is kind of leftist leaning under Nasser, then how Americans are supporting so how these global forces tap into this competition, and also how the internal regional competition is anchored again back into the alliances, and also also as you were referring and reading your manuscript book, Muhammad Salah, and I say, yes, you could say more about this, please. Don't just ask. The idea of actually even they enter and meddle into affairs of as you were saying, even orchestrating regime coups inside Sudan, and how coup starts and how coup ends has to do with So in Egypt, I will not go more deeper than this because I'm a refugee. If I'm kicked out, I'm joking. I'm joking, of course. So how the internal, and also when you were bringing Sara about Emirati, actually now you feel they are competing to give the water their share to UAE. They are not competing for their own population development. That is, they are competing under the slogan of national interest, whether it's Ethiopia but what ends up doing, they facilitate this kind of scramble of resources, land grabbing and everything in Sudan, in Ethiopia. So so the internal competition or regional competition is intensified because they are also regional patrons like UAE. So this is what intensifies also this kind. Otherwise, there could be a kind of collaboratory approach across like upstream, downstream. One of the proposal was for Sudan, for example, Mele Zenawi proposed to Sudan to contribute to the Renaissance Dam. And some Sudanese scholars calculate that by paying half of Marawi Dam's cost, we would get double of what we got from Marawi. But Marawi Dam was based on political calculation, not economic and all those things. So like this kind of collaborative approach is being like hammered and disabled because of such kind of competition. Yeah, so all that kind of, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamer.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can.
I have the last question or?
Last one.
Yeah, or Dr. Mary, sorry.
If someone.
I didn't want to inhibit you. Huh? Please, you can ask a question.
If there is no, maybe
yeah,
then
we can give you the next when.
I just put in mind for the next seminar.
Yeah.
And to tell people about what is.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this, the last point, the question for Tamer, the link between the water issue, the energy project, and the food security. As we see in your bio, can you just build some bridges between those topics? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like the whole idea of like, because like I started by saying this multidimensionality of water use. Yeah, like where are you using the water for agriculture, for electric generation, and also not only the water use, but also the use of economic resources in what in economists say cost, opportunity cost. Yeah. What is being prioritized, yeah, even in terms of generating food security, what kind of developmental approach is being, for example, the huge debt created by dams and borrowing from Arab funds is also creating debts that Sudanese government needs to pay some land in return if they can't pay. And that is also like creating some kind of, when we were queued up for bread, and the bread price was going from £1 to £3, we were seeing how regime was like kind of glorifying the investment made by this Gulf investor in Northern part. His name I forgot, Hajar or no. So like yes, like all this kind of scramble for research, like for resources like land, and also the kind of patterns of even during this very intensive food insecurity in Sudan, there is interestingly some foods going out. Like so, food security is and that is what I don't like about really the current like kind of way of conceptualizing food security as if it has only started after. There is a very depoliticization and dehistoricization. What you read is only statistics of people facing insecurity and all, but those kind of production, political economy related exploitation, you don't hear about this in food security and food insecurity reports, which is like kind of synoptic, as if so that is a kind of critique, and to just connect it to my current project, I'm following actually theoretically the similar line of what is being like argued, because the digitalization is a current mega developmental discourse, because when you digitalize assistance, what they say is you can like it helps efficiency of delivery, accountability, and all those things. But digitalization is also has its own political economy. For example, the current war about like the internet, weaponization of the internet. Now they close the internet, but RSF is, for example, using their own Starlink satellite for people to transfer. Like some people, like they pay for the RSF to access the internet. So like who is so the digital equality, the digitalization bring other actors and also bring some other conceptualization of food security. So we are looking into like how this turn of digitalization of aid is leading to conceptualization, misconceptualization of food security and all those things. I mean, it's the same kind of how people's reality are visibilized, invisibilized in that kind of narration and discourses about food security. How like the big investors scramble for, so for example, Jazeera, gradual destruction and neoliberalization and that follow. So how those, like when you go to the sector of, for example, animal production, like all other like food producing. So the production is somehow muted and silenced. People who are facing the food insecurity are conceptualized as consumers. So like their productive aspect is ignored. And they treat, for example, the indicators of negative consumption, like how people are selling their properties to what kind of food they are eating. So you highlight the consumerism part of the food insecure people and ignore the production and history of production and what is curtailing that kind of. So like you see similar kind of resemblance of how knowledge is being produced to produce what kind of effects. So I think that is what like the resemblance of and connections. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Tamer, and
Thank you,
thanks,
Tamer.
Sara. I think